The term Odyssey now symbolizes a voyage of monumental scale derived from Homer's epic poem, the Odyssey. Composed in the 8th century BC, this work serves as a continuation of Homer's The Iliad, which details the concluding events of the legendary Trojan War. The Odyssey recounts the extensive and adventurous delays faced by Odysseus as he attempts to return to his cherished Ithaca after the war. Traditionally, the Odyssey was likely a tale passed down orally through generations before Homer consolidated it into a single written narrative. The story utilizes a flashback technique to unfold the epic return of King Odysseus to his realm, palace, and family following the conclusion of the Trojan War. Odysseus is a legendary figure famously chronicled by Homer. His parents were Laertes and Anticlea, and he was married to Penelope, with whom he had a son named Telemachus. Renowned for his sharp intellect, Odysseus was aptly nicknamed Odysseus the Cunning. His grandfather, Autolycus, was a well-known thief throughout the Peloponnese. His name was later Romanized to Ulysses, which is how he is widely recognized globally today. Odysseus was known for his proud and haughty demeanor. He was adept at changing both his appearance and voice, a master of disguise. His leadership in military and governance was critical, particularly demonstrated by his significant contributions to the Greek triumph in the lengthy Trojan War. The sequence of events leading to Troy's demise commenced with Paris of Troy kidnapping Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Furious, Menelaus summoned the kings of Greece, including Odysseus, who had all sworn to uphold Helen's honor should it ever be challenged. Initially, Odysseus attempted to dodge this obligation by pretending to be insane. However, Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother, exposed his deceit, and consequently, Odysseus joined forces with notables such as Agamemnon, Achilles, Nestor, and Teucer to wage war against Troy. A decade into the siege, with the Greeks still camped outside Troy's formidable walls, Odysseus, known as the Cunning and trusted advisor to Agamemnon, crafted a strategy to trick the Trojans into thinking the Greeks had retreated. His plan involved leaving a colossal wooden horse outside Troy's gates under the cover of night. At dawn, the Trojans, finding the deserted encampment and the mysterious horse, believed the Greeks had surrendered and left the horse as a divine offering for a safe voyage home. They brought the horse into their city, celebrating what they thought was their victory. Unbeknownst to them, Odysseus had engineered a compartment inside the horse to smuggle Greek soldiers into the city. These warriors emerged after dark, killed the unsuspecting guards, and opened the gates for the Greek army waiting nearby. This cunning ploy led to the Greek conquest of Troy. Following their victory, Odysseus and his crew embarked on the journey back to Ithaca, but ultimately, Odysseus was the sole survivor to return home. Odysseus and his companions faced a prolonged and eventful return journey. Along the way, they encountered a myriad of wonders, filling their voyage with unique sights and experiences. By the time Odysseus reached his homeland, he had amassed a collection of tales and memories unparalleled by any other traveler in the world. Odysseus and his fleet, consisting of 12 ships, departed from Troy, guided by calm seas. Days into their journey, they approached land, prompted by Eurylochus, Odysseus's deputy, to anchor and raid a nearby city, under the impression they would face no resistance. As they landed, the local Cicones fled to the mountains, allowing Odysseus and his crew to ransack the deserted city. Despite the initial success, his men lingered on shore, indulging in a lavish feast with plentiful wine, which led them to fall asleep by the seaside. At dawn, the Cicones returned, reinforced by allied warriors, and attacked, inflicting severe losses on Odysseus's men. The Greeks were forced to retreat hastily to their ships, suffering significant casualties. This prompted a sharp disagreement between Odysseus and Eurylochus about their tactics, though the conflict was soon quelled by their comrades, restoring calm among the ranks. As Odysseus and his crew sailed southward, they were unexpectedly diverted towards the land of the Lotus-Eaters. While exploring the area, some crew members interacted with the locals and consumed the indigenous lotus. The effects of the plant were intoxicating, causing a deep sedative haze to fall over them. The narcotic nature of the lotus made the men forget their families and homes, instilling a desire to remain and continue eating the lotus indefinitely. Unwilling to leave, it took the efforts of Odysseus and other sober crew members to physically carry the affected back to their ship. In a bid to prevent further incidents, those under the influence were tied to the ship's masts as they set sail, thwarting any attempts to return to the island and the addictive lotus. After several weeks sailing through calm seas without incident, Odysseus and his crew finally landed on a mysterious island. Curious and eager to explore, Odysseus led a group of his men inland in search of resources. Their explorations soon led them to the entrance of a vast cave, which they ventured into, finding it stocked with sheep. Unbeknownst to them, this cave was the dwelling of Polyphemus, a giant cyclops known for his ruthlessness and part of a race of giants that inhabited the island. Upon Polyphemus's return to his cave, he immediately sensed the presence of intruders. In a swift move to secure his home, he rolled a gigantic boulder across the entrance, effectively trapping Odysseus and his men inside. The warriors, realizing their perilous situation, watched as the massive figure of Polyphemus loomed over them. Odysseus, ever cunning, introduced themselves as lost sailors in search of food, hiding their true identities to avoid further wrath from the Cyclops. The Cyclops, enraged by the loss of some of his sheep, which the Greeks had killed for food, declared that they would not leave his cave alive. True to his word, Polyphemus began a horrifying ritual, grabbing 2 men each day, smashing their heads against the rock walls and consuming them raw. This brutal routine continued, pushing Odysseus to devise a desperate escape plan. He noticed a large stash of strong wine in the cave and presented it to Polyphemus, who, unfamiliar with the effects of alcohol, drank greedily and soon fell into a deep slumber. Seizing the moment, Odysseus and his men heated a wooden stake in the fire until it was glowing red and then drove it deep into the single eye of the sleeping giant, blinding him. Polyphemus woke in excruciating pain, howling and thrashing about the cave, which alerted the other Cyclopes. They rushed to his aid, but upon hearing that nobody had hurt him, they laughed, thinking him foolish, and left him alone in his misery. The following morning, as Polyphemus, now blind and disoriented, removed the boulder to let his sheep out to graze, Odysseus and his men executed their escape plan. They tied themselves to the undersides of the larger sheep and slipped out unseen by the groping hands of Polyphemus. Once they reached the safety of their ship, Odysseus, unable to contain his pride, revealed his identity to Polyphemus from the safety of his departing ship. Furious, the Cyclops hurled a massive rock towards the sound of Odysseus's voice. It narrowly missed, crashing into the sea near the ship. Polyphemus then called upon his father, Poseidon, god of the sea, begging him to curse Odysseus's voyage, an act that would haunt Odysseus for the rest of his journey as he earned the enmity of the powerful sea god. Escaping the wrath of the Cyclopes, Odysseus and his fleet made their way to Aeolia, the domain of Aeolus, the divine keeper of the winds. Aeolus, who wielded the power to command the winds across both sea and land, was moved by Odysseus's tales of hardship. In a gesture of goodwill, he presented Odysseus with a leather bag that contained all the winds, save the gentle west wind, which would steer them directly towards Ithaca. Grateful for such a gift, Odysseus resumed his voyage, vigilantly watching over the precious bag as they neared home. Despite the clear sailing, the curiosity among his crew grew with each passing day. They wondered what secret treasure their captain guarded so jealously that could possibly be worth more than the spoils they had already acquired. This curiosity reached its peak when, exhausted from his constant vigil, Odysseus finally succumbed to sleep as Ithaca's shores appeared on the horizon. Seizing their chance, 2 of his men opened the bag, unleashing a catastrophic storm. The unleashed winds roared and reversed their course completely. Awakened by the tumult, Odysseus was devastated to find his ship far from home, pushed back to Aeolia. Desperate, he appealed to Aeolus for aid once more, but found no sympathy. Aeolus, seeing this misfortune as a sign of divine disfavor, refused to assist Odysseus again. With a heavy heart and no winds to aid them, Odysseus and his crew faced the daunting prospect of an even longer and more uncertain journey back to Ithaca. As night gave way to dawn, the silhouette of an island emerged on the horizon. This was Telepylos, a fortress of nature, surrounded by imposing cliffs and accessible only through a single narrow channel. While the rest of the fleet sailed into the tranquil harbor, Odysseus, perhaps through caution or intuition, chose to moor his ship in the rougher waters offshore. Odysseus dispatched 2 scouts to investigate the island. They soon encountered a young girl who led them to her father's residence. However, as they approached the imposing castle, they were greeted by a terrifying sight: a gigantic woman who summoned her husband with loud calls. Her husband, a monstrous giant, charged forth, seized one of the scouts, and devoured him on the spot. The other scout fled in terror back to the harbor. Panic ensued as the entire race of giant inhabitants pursued the surviving scout. At the harbor, the giants wreaked havoc, hurling huge rocks and spearing the sailors with great spears. The ships were obliterated under the assault, leaving no escape for the crew. Only Odysseus, who had wisely anchored his ship outside the bay, managed to evade destruction. He and a handful of sailors narrowly escaped the deadly encounter, setting off once more on their fraught journey home. Having narrowly escaped from the giants, Odysseus and his remaining crew found refuge on the island of Aeaea, the domain of the enchantress Circe, known for her formidable sorcery. Circe, with her profound magical abilities, had foreseen the arrival of these weary travelers on her island. A few of Odysseus's men were dispatched to explore the island and stumbled upon Circe's opulent palace. There they encountered the enchantress seated majestically on her throne, surrounded by wild animals that, unbeknownst to them, were once men who had fallen victim to her transformative spells. With a mere wave of her wand, she turned these mighty Greek warriors into swine. Fortuitously, the god Hermes intervened, providing Odysseus with a magical herb that rendered him immune to Circe's spells. When Circe attempted to cast her spell on Odysseus, she was astonished to find it ineffective. Odysseus, leveraging this advantage, demanded that his men be returned to their human forms. The sorceress agreed to his terms, but with a condition: Odysseus must share her bedchamber. Resigned, Odysseus consented, and as a result, he and his crew spent an entire year in the idyllic, though deceptive, peace of Aeaea. When it was time to resume their journey, Odysseus approached Circe for guidance on their perilous path forward. The wise Circe, capable of foreseeing the future, advised him to venture into the underworld to seek insights from the blind prophet Tiresias. This guidance set the stage for the next phase of Odysseus's epic journey home. No living man had ventured into the underworld, yet the courageous Odysseus embarked on such a journey to hasten his return to Ithaca. By the shadowy banks of the river Acheron, Odysseus and his crew offered sacrifices to Hades, after which Odysseus alone descended into the netherworld. There, the blind prophet Tiresias appeared to him, revealing that his path home would require navigating the perilous waters between Scylla and Charybdis, two formidable sea monsters. After leaving the underworld, Odysseus and his men sailed for days without land in sight. Soon, eerie and melodious sounds filled the air, pulling at the sailors' emotions and stirring a deep longing within them. Recognizing the danger, Odysseus recalled Circe's warning about the Sirens, mystical creatures whose songs led men to their doom. Heeding Circe's advice, Odysseus filled his men's ears with wax to shield them from the Sirens' calls. However, curious to experience the Sirens' song himself, he instructed his crew to bind him tightly to the mast, ensuring he could not act on the urges the song might invoke. As they sailed past the Sirens, the crew, deaf to the enchanting melodies, remained focused and unaffected. Meanwhile, Odysseus, utterly captivated by the beautiful yet perilous song, struggled against his bonds, desperate to join the Sirens. Despite his pleas, his tight restraints prevented his escape, and his crew, unable to hear his cries or the deadly song, continued on their course. As the ship sailed further from the Sirens, their song faded, and with it, the danger passed, allowing the crew to safely resume their journey homeward. Heeding the counsel of Tiresias, Odysseus navigated a path that brought him dangerously close to Scylla, a six-headed beast once a woman, and Charybdis, a deadly whirlpool. Tiresias had suggested sacrificing 6 men to Scylla to ensure the majority could safely pass. As they approached the strait separating the monster and the maelstrom, the crew trembled with fear, aware of the imminent threat on both sides. Odysseus, though deeply saddened by the necessary loss, prepared himself to forfeit 6 warriors to protect the rest. As they sailed by, Scylla snatched her toll, allowing the others to escape her grasp. The haunting cries of the sacrificed men echoed with Odysseus for the rest of his life, a constant reminder of his grim decision, undisclosed to his crew. They narrowly escaped Charybdis and continued onward. Exhausted from their narrow escape, Odysseus's ship made landfall on Thrinacia, the sacred isle of the sun god Helios, where his sacred cattle roamed. Despite explicit warnings from both Tiresias and Circe against harming the divine herd, his starving men slaughtered the cattle for food. Enraged, Helios beseeched Zeus to avenge the desecration of his cattle, threatening to let the sun set forever into Hades if justice wasn't served. In retribution, Zeus struck Odysseus's ship with a thunderbolt as it departed Thrinacia, dooming all but Odysseus. Cast adrift, the beleaguered hero was once again swept past the dangers of Scylla and Charybdis, eventually washing ashore on an unknown island, alone and far from home. Odysseus washed ashore on Ogygia, where he would spend 7 years in the company of the nymph Calypso, who found him unconscious on the beach. She offered him immortality if he would stay and love her, yet the longing for Ithaca, his wife and his son, who would now be much older, gnawed at him incessantly. Despite Calypso's beauty and power, she could not quench the persistent sense of unfulfillment in Odysseus's heart. Deeply in love with the mortal, Calypso was reluctant to let him leave. However, the will of Zeus prevailed. He sent Hermes to demand Odysseus's release. Complying with the divine command, Calypso helped Odysseus build a raft, and he set sail once again. But his journey was far from smooth. Soon after departing, he encountered a fierce storm that cast him onto yet another foreign shore. Telemachus, now 20, embarked on a quest to find his father, Odysseus, who had not returned since the Trojan War's conclusion a decade earlier. Back home, his mother, Penelope, was besieged by suitors clamoring for her hand, believing Odysseus to be dead. She devised a clever strategy to delay remarriage. She would weave a burial shroud for Odysseus's father during the day and unravel her work at night, thus perpetually postponing her decision. This ruse kept the suitors at bay, as Penelope promised to choose a husband once the shroud was completed. However, her plan was foiled when a maid revealed her deception to the suitors, who intensified their demands. Despite this, Telemachus, confident in his mother's ability to manage the suitors, left Ithaca. With the support of Athena and a band of loyal followers, he journeyed to Sparta to seek information from Menelaus. Unfortunately, Menelaus had no news to offer, and a disheartened Telemachus returned to Ithaca. Odysseus washed up on the shores of what historians now think is modern Corfu, in the land of the Phaeacians, after being caught in a severe storm. Nausicaa, the local princess, discovered him exhausted and without clothes by the sea, and guided him to her father's palace. There, in the court of King Alcinous and Queen Arete, he listened to the bard Demodocus sing about the Trojan War. Hearing tales of the war and the Trojan horse which he had devised deeply moved Odysseus. The weight of his past and his long journey overwhelmed him, and he wept openly in the court. His emotional display prompted those around him to inquire about his identity and the reasons for his sorrow. It was then that Odysseus disclosed who he was and recounted the arduous challenges he faced while trying to return to Ithaca. Touched by his story, the Phaeacians offered him a swift ship and their finest supplies to aid his journey home. With their help, Odysseus finally made it back to Ithaca, ready to reunite with his wife Penelope and son Telemachus after 20 long years of separation. Odysseus's return to Ithaca was a secretive affair. He arrived disguised as a beggar to avoid detection and made his way stealthily to the royal palace. There, he first encountered his aged servants and his son, Telemachus, now a young man. From them, Odysseus learned about the relentless suitors vying for Penelope's hand, exploiting his long absence. Maintaining his guise, he subsequently met with Penelope, who failed to recognize him under the disguise. He recounted tales of her husband's bravery during the Trojan War, which brought tears to her eyes and stirred deep emotions within her. To address the suitor issue, Penelope proposed a challenge. She declared that she would marry the suitor who could string Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through a series of 12 aligned axe handles, a feat she believed only Odysseus could accomplish. The suitors, eager to prove their worth, attempted the task, but soon found that it required not only strength but also unmatched skill and precision, qualities none of them possessed. When Odysseus, still disguised, took his turn, he expertly strung the bow and completed the challenge effortlessly, his arrow slicing through each axe handle in a perfect display of his prowess. Revealing his true identity amidst the stunned suitors, chaos erupted as Odysseus, Telemachus, and Eumaeus took up arms, swiftly dispatching all 108 suitors and punishing the disloyal maidservants who had consorted with them. When Penelope entered the bloody hall, she was overwhelmed and initially unable to accept that the beggar before her was her husband. Skeptical, she devised one last test to confirm his identity, instructing the servants to move their intricately crafted wedding bed. Odysseus protested vehemently, revealing that the bed was immovable, built from the trunk of an olive tree rooted to the ground, a detail only the true Odysseus would know. Overjoyed and convinced by his intimate knowledge of their shared life and home, Penelope rushed to embrace Odysseus. Tears filled her eyes as relief washed over her. Her husband, the king, had finally returned. This poignant reunion marked the end of their long and arduous separations, reuniting the family and restoring Odysseus to his rightful place on the throne of Ithaca. Yet, Odysseus's saga did not conclude with his reclamation of the throne. The blind prophet Tiresias had once advised him that after reinstating his rule in Ithaca, he must embark on a final journey, traveling inland with an oar until he met people who did not recognize it as such. Heeding this prophecy, Odysseus passed the kingship to his son Telemachus and left Ithaca, Penelope, and his newly restored kingdom behind. With the oar over his shoulder, Odysseus traveled far from the coast, through villages and towns, seeking those who were unfamiliar with the sea. Everywhere he went, the oar was recognized, that is, until he reached a remote inland community. There, the people, unfamiliar with the ocean, did not know what his oar was. In this distant land, far from the familiar shores of Ithaca, Odysseus finally settled. He married a local princess and integrated into a life vastly different from his seafaring days. Among these people, Odysseus lived out his remaining years, ultimately dying peacefully, a stark contrast to the tumultuous life he had led. It was here, in a land untouched by the sea, that the legendary wanderer found his final rest.